Is it a full-motion Tomb Raider or a sexier Resident Evil? If we're talking about the Fear Effects series, then the answer is all of the above. 25 years ago, the franchise was paving the way for adult-oriented cinematic adventures. And then, it inexplicably disappeared. Well, now it's back thanks to Limited Run Games, who just announced that Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix will be coming to modern consoles next year, featuring enhanced graphics, more cunning opponents, and 8 new areas to puzzle through. Yeah, that's cool news. But are either of these two games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Edge, Next Generation, and more classic magazines that reviewed the Fear Effect series back when it first came out. Well, I hope you brought a towel, because things are about to get real steamy in this episode of Fear Effect Review Crew. Four years after first introducing the world to Lara Croft, Eidos was still riding high off of the breakout success of Tomb Raider. The Last Revelation was coming out later that year, the Angelina Jolie movie was currently in production, and Lara was still winding up on a bunch of magazine covers. But you know, what if suddenly everybody got bored of video games' leading lady? Don't worry, Eidos had another impossibly attractive action star waiting in the wings. Fear Effect is a weird mashup of everything that was big in the 1980s and 90s. Literally taking elements from Blade Runner, Indiana Jones, The Sixth Sense, classic John Woo films, and even survival horror. Despite its many influences, Fear Effect is an ambitious game that not only told an elaborate story over the course of 4 discs, but also toyed with the visuals. The graphics are a combination of cel-shaded characters interacting with a pre-rendered world made up of full-motion video loops. That's a fun thing to think about in retrospect, but what did the critics say back in 2000? Let's go ahead and start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who thought Fear Effect was another winner from Eidos. Giving it an average score of 9 out of 10, they appreciated that it was a more mature game. John gave it a 9 and said that you really wouldn't know that this was an American game. In terms of production value and storyline, it has a lot in common with the very best that anime has to offer. Despite some niggly control issues, oversimplified puzzles, and the fact that it's a bit too short for 4 discs worth of game, it has to be said that Fear Effect is top-notch. The plot is simply superb, and it's filled with twists and surprises. A true adult game. Dean largely agreed, though gave it a slightly lower 8.5 out of 10. Intriguing is the best way to describe Fear Effect. Sounds like hype, but the characters, plot, the Blade Runner-like ambiance, it all melds together to create quite a surrealistic thriller. The fortunate part is that no one element weakens the game. If it had bad control or impossible puzzles, it would ruin the vibe. If anything, it's a little obvious at times, but nothing major. I highly recommend this one. As it turns out, EGM's average was actually Fear Effect's highest score. While PSM gave the game a very similar 4.5 out of 5, the rest of the critics went lower. This includes Insight Video Gaming, which gave the blockbuster release a score of 4 out of 5. That's the same score we saw from Next Generation, who argued that you're bound to get frustrated at points. For every 20 seconds of gameplay you have before you die, you have to endure 10 to 15 seconds of loading. It's maddening. There's also a lack of intuitiveness in some of the puzzles. At times you'll feel like banging your head into the wall. Still, if you love a good story and have the patience to live with the game's few flaws, Fear Effect should go a long way to tiding you over until you get your hands on a PlayStation 2. Now, when it comes to the lowest score, we have to turn to Next Generation's sister magazine, Edge. They gave it a low 6 out of 10, arguing that although Fear Effect looks great, there are serious gameplay faults that undermine the experience. Fundamentally, the balance between puzzle solving and beating the end-of-the-level bosses is extremely flawed, and the game's clumsy control system makes the boss encounters absurdly difficult. You actually come to dread the arrival of the next big bad guy, which hampers the effectiveness of the storyline. In such a beautifully cinematic game featuring clever plotting and scripting, such deficiencies are even more offensive. It'll be interesting to see what kind of quality of life updates that come with the re-release, if any. This is one of those games that really wowed me at the time, but I don't know, some of those imperfections mentioned here may be a lot more glaring a quarter century later.
One sphere takes over, the lines of reality blur, making it impossible to tell whether you're playing or being played.
PlayStation.
Taking a lesson from the success of Tomb Raider, Eidos decided to strike while the iron was hot when it came to Fear Effect 2. Barely waiting a year to release the sequel, Retro Helix is a bigger and more ambitious take on the cel-shaded action game, with a deeper story and more impressive visual effects. It was also a more mature game in more ways than one. A lot of the advertising revolved around the two women in skin-tight costumes and suggestive positions, often with a risque pun like, "These two ladies put the ass in Assassin." The game really leaned into the whole sex appeal thing, something that we were starting to see more of in the early part of the 21st century. The strategy helped to keep people talking about Fear Effect 2 and even got a third game greenlit. However, Fear Effect 3 was eventually cancelled and the series languished in video game purgatory until 2018's Fear Effect Sedna, which was met with great disdain from both critics and fans. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we're here to talk about Fear Effect 2, not 3. We're going to start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, where there was a big disagreement between the three critics. Chris gave Fear Effect 2 a 7.5 out of 10, spending a lot of the time talking about the full motion video. If it didn't have the gameplay to back it up, it would be nothing more than an excuse to serve up heavy doses of violence and sexual innuendo. Without question, the full motion video makes this game look better, but also makes it look very grainy. Good thing the load times are quick. The control scheme takes some getting used to, but once you do, it's really handy to be able to switch weapons, bust up some enemies, and reload all while you're running. It reminds me more of Out of This World than Resident Evil, maybe just because of the frustrating style of some of its puzzles. Todd liked the game a lot more than Chris, giving it a 9 out of 10. There's some hype surrounding Fear Effect 2, since it features two pretty ladies playing a brief game of tonsil hockey. And besides that, there's profanity, lots of bullet-to-the-brain gruesomeness, and a story that entertains, surprises, shocks, and unravels into plenty of surreal weirdness. But shock value isn't the reason you should unlock your pocket at the corner gaming store. Buy Fear Effect 2 because it's awesome. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the game an average score of 8.5 out of 10. Now it's worth noting that Game Informer also gave Fear Effect 2 a score of 8.5 out of 10, but plenty of other magazines liked it a lot less. PSM went down to an 8 out of 10, while the official UK PlayStation 2 magazine couldn't muster up anything more than a 7 out of 10. Edge was even harsher, going with a 6 out of 10. They argued that the original Fear Effect was one of the rare full-motion video-heavy games in which the pre-rendered sequences actually added to the game, and Retro Helix is no less successful in this respect, despite adolescent leanings at times. But while Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix is a sufficiently accomplished enhancement of the original, it does seem like the genre, with its puzzle-heavy emphasis, has nowhere to go on more advanced hardware apart from down the more action-oriented path that the Resident Evil series has already traveled. Certainly Chronos has got about as much out of the old gray box as it's likely to, But for the series to make the leap to the next hardware platform, the developer will have to try harder to push the limits of the genre. When it comes to the lowest score, that belongs to Maxim Magazine, who gave it a 2 out of 5. But seriously, who cares what Maxim says? Let's instead turn to Blender, who gave Fear Effect 2 a score of 3 out of 5 in their very first issue. Anime-inspired gunslinging lesbian mercenaries not only put the ass in Assassin, but will keep Lara Croft reeling in her tomb. Hey, that Assassin's line was literally from the advertising. You're professional writers, Blender. You gotta come up with something original, like, I don't know, they put the double D's in Double Agent. Actually, on second thought, that's probably what Maxim said. Now, when we look at the top scores, we see the official US PlayStation magazine going with a 4.5 out of 5. The same exact score that GamePro gave it in their 150th issue. Now, believe it or not, the top score belongs to the notoriously grumpy Next Generation, who may have given it a 5 out of 5, but they would definitely object to me using the P word. Sure, it's not perfect. Certain tasks are repetitive, and a few of the puzzles are needlessly obscure. But multiple endings add to the replayability, and the plot twist at the end is alone almost worth the price of admission. There's currently nothing like this on any platform, and though it's a little short, it's definitely worth your time. As you can see, the critics were still on board with the Fear Effect franchise, even if the detractors were a little bit more vocal this time around. With an overall average of 76%, Retro Helix isn't that far off from the 80% that we saw from the original. While not all of the elements hold up all that well a quarter century later, both of these games are certainly worth playing. I hear that it puts the ass in, well, you know. Hi, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we add new episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. In fact, we have a whole playlist with more than 100 review crew episodes. Now, here's the question I have for you. Is it time to reboot Fear Effect? I know that dismal third game all but killed the franchise, but maybe it's worth it to try again? Let me see your answers in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back later this week with a review of Digger Gun. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.